Her life had always followed a predictable rhythm. Wake up early, rush to work, come home before dark, and fall asleep believing tomorrow would be just like today. Maya believed safety was built from routine, that as long as she avoided trouble, trouble would avoid her too. She had no idea how fragile that illusion was. No warning, no second chance, just one night, one meeting, one pair of dark eyes that would tear her normal life apart forever. The moment she heard his voice, calm, commanding, dangerously controlled, something inside her knew her world had shifted. She didn't belong here. She didn't belong near him, and yet fate had already decided otherwise. The night it happened was supposed to be ordinary. Maya was walking home from work, the city humming softly around her, neon lights reflecting off wet pavement after a brief rain. She hugged her coat tighter, thinking only about dinner and sleep, unaware that she was being watched. The black car parked across the street didn't catch her attention. The men standing near it blended too easily into the shadows. What stopped her cold was the sound of a gunshot, sharp, sudden, slicing through the night like glass shattering. Maya froze. Her breath caught painfully in her throat as chaos erupted around her. People screamed, footsteps scattered, and instinct told her to run, but her body refused to move. That was when she saw him. He stepped out of the darkness as if he owned it, tall and composed, his presence silencing the panic around him. He didn't look rushed, he didn't look afraid. His dark coat was spotless, his expression unreadable, his eyes sharp enough to cut through lies and fear alike. When his gaze locked onto hers, Maya felt exposed, as though he could see every secret she had ever kept. "Move," he said calmly, his voice low and commanding. She didn't even realize she was holding her breath until she obeyed. Within seconds, she was being pulled behind him, shielded by his body as chaos unfolded nearby. She didn't understand what was happening, only that staying close to him felt safer than being alone. His hand rested firmly but respectfully on her arm, grounding her even as her heart thundered in her chest. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly, not unkindly. Maya swallowed hard. "I live here," she whispered. He glanced at her, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "Not anymore," he replied. By the time the police sirens wailed in the distance, it was already too late. He had memorized her face. His men had noted her presence. She had seen something she shouldn't have. As he escorted her into the waiting car, gentle but unyielding, Maya realized her safe, normal life was slipping through her fingers. She tried to protest, to ask questions, but the words died on her lips when he leaned closer and spoke softly, dangerously close to her ear. "From this moment on, you are under my protection." The car door closed with a finality that echoed in her chest. As the city lights blurred past the window, Maya understood the truth she had been avoiding. She hadn't just crossed paths with a stranger, she had met the Mafia prince, and nothing in her life would ever be normal again. The car ride felt endless, even though the city passed by in a blur of lights and shadows. Maya sat rigidly in the back seat, her hands clenched in her lap, every nerve screaming that she had made a terrible mistake by not running when she had the chance. The man beside her, silent, composed, impossibly calm, made no effort to intimidate her, and somehow that unsettled her more. His presence filled the space without words, controlled and deliberate, as if chaos bent itself around him. When she finally dared to look at him, she found his gaze already on her, steady and assessing, not cruel but sharp enough to see straight through her fear. "You're safe," he said at last, his voice low and even. Maya almost laughed at the irony. Safe had never felt so unfamiliar. "You don't get to decide that," she replied, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. His lips curved slightly, not a smile, but something close to respect. "I do," he answered simply. Tonight, you were in the wrong place. That makes you my responsibility." The words settled heavily between them. Responsibility. Not a threat, not a promise, something more complicated. The car slowed as tall iron gates came into view, opening silently to reveal an estate hidden from the rest of the city. Maya's breath caught. This wasn't a hideout, it was a fortress. Lights glowed warmly against stone walls, guards moved with disciplined ease, and everything about the place spoke of power that didn't need to announce itself. When the car stopped, the man stepped out first, offering her his hand, not as a command but as an option. She hesitated, then took it, her fingers trembling slightly against his steady grip. Inside, the mansion felt quieter than the chaos they had left behind, almost eerily calm. Maya was led into a spacious room where soft lighting and understated elegance clashed painfully with the fear tightening her chest. "You'll stay here tonight," he said. "No locked doors, no guards inside." She stared at him, disbelief mixing with confusion. "You expect me to trust you?" she asked. He met her gaze evenly. "I expect you to survive," he replied. Later, as the house settled into silence, Maya lay awake replaying every moment of the night. Questions crowded her mind, but one rose above the rest. Who was he? The answer came sooner than she expected. The next morning, she overheard the staff speaking in hushed tones, using a name that made her blood run cold. Alessandro De Luca, the Mafia prince, the heir to one of the most powerful underworld families in the city. Her heart sank. She hadn't been rescued, she had been claimed by a world she didn't understand and couldn't escape. When Alessandro found her later that day in the garden, there was no arrogance in his demeanor, no unnecessary cruelty. "You know who I am now," he said quietly. Maya nodded, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "Then let me go," she pleaded. For the first time, something dark flickered across his expression. Not anger, but restraint. "I can't. Not yet." She shook her head, tears burning behind her eyes. "You're ruining my life." Alessandro was silent for a long moment before answering, "I'm trying to save it." Days passed, and fear slowly gave way to reluctant understanding. Alessandro never touched her without permission, never raised his voice, never treated her like a prisoner. Instead, he explained the rules of his world, the dangers she had unknowingly stepped into, the enemies who wouldn't hesitate to use her as leverage. Maya listened, torn between terror and the undeniable truth that he was right. Her old life was no longer safe. Every step outside could be watched. Every shadow could hide someone waiting. And yet, despite everything, there were moments when she saw cracks in Alessandro's armor, when his gaze softened as he watched her laugh with the staff, when his voice lowered as he asked if she had slept well, when his protective instincts surfaced without effort. Maya hated herself for noticing these things, for feeling her fear blur into something dangerously close to trust. She reminded herself daily that this was temporary, that she would leave the moment it was safe. But deep inside, a quiet truth was forming, one she wasn't ready to face. Her normal life hadn't just ended the night she met the Mafia prince. It was slowly being replaced by something far more complicated, far more dangerous, and far more irresistible. The first real sign that danger had followed Maya into Alessandro's world came quietly, disguised as an ordinary afternoon. She was sitting in the sunlit conservatory, trying to lose herself in a book she hadn't turned a page of in nearly an hour, when the atmosphere shifted. The air grew tense, heavy, as if the house itself had sensed something wrong. Alessandro appeared in the doorway moments later, his expression unreadable but alert, his phone clenched tightly in his hand. He didn't say anything at first, he didn't need to. The look in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. "Pack a small bag," he said calmly. "We're leaving." Maya's heart leapt into her throat. Leaving where? She asked, already standing. Somewhere safer, he replied. The word safer echoed bitterly in her mind as she followed him down the hall, her pulse racing. She had barely stepped outside when the sound of gunfire shattered the calm. Alessandro reacted instantly, pulling her against him and turning his body to shield hers. Guards moved with practiced precision, returning fire, voices sharp and controlled. Maya clung to Alessandro, fear stealing her breath. But even through the chaos, she felt how steady he was, solid, unshaken, protective. They barely escaped the ambush, speeding away from the estate under a veil of chaos and sirens. Maya's hands trembled as she stared out the window, trying to process how close they had come to disaster. Alessandro said nothing, his jaw clenched, eyes fixed ahead. When they finally reached a remote safe house, the silence that followed was almost unbearable. They weren't aiming for you, Maya said softly, her voice shaking. Alessandro turned to her, his gaze intense. They were, he corrected. Your leverage now. The truth hit her harder than any gunshot. This wasn't about being in the wrong place anymore. She was part of this world now, whether she wanted to be or not. Fear turned into anger, and she faced him, her voice breaking. Then let me go. I don't want to be a reason someone dies. Alessandro's expression softened just enough to reveal the weight he carried. If you leave, he said quietly, you won't survive the night. As the hours passed, the safe house became a cocoon of tension and forced closeness. Maya couldn't sleep, haunted by the sound of gunfire and the memory of Alessandro's arms around her. She found him in the kitchen just before dawn, standing by the window, the city far away. "Does it ever stop?" she asked. He shook his head slowly. "No," he admitted. "You learn to live with it." She studied him, seeing not just the Mafia prince, but a man burdened by responsibility and loss. "And you?" she asked. "Do you ever get tired of protecting everyone?" He met her gaze, something raw flickering beneath his control. "Every day," he said, "but I don't get to stop." The honesty in his voice did something to her. For the first time, she saw him not as her captor or her savior, but as someone just as trapped by his life as she was. The realization unsettled her more than fear ever had. When danger struck again, this time a message left deliberately at the safe house, it was clear the threats were escalating. A warning, a promise. Alessandro tightened security, staying closer to Maya than ever. She noticed the way his hand hovered near her when they moved, the way his eyes scanned every room before she entered. It should have frightened her. Instead, it made her feel strangely cared for. Late that night, as thunder rolled in the distance, Maya finally confronted the truth she'd been avoiding. If I survive this, my life will never go back to normal. Alessandro looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. No, he agreed. It won't. Their eyes locked, the weight of unspoken emotion hanging between them. Something had changed, something irreversible. Fear had drawn her into his world, but now it was trust that held her there. As she returned to her room, Maya realized that the line between escape and belonging was blurring. Her safe, normal life was gone, but in its place, something dangerous and deeply compelling was taking shape. And for the first time, she wasn't sure she wanted to run anymore. In the days that followed the ambush, the world narrowed for Maya and Alessandro into a fragile routine shaped by caution and proximity. The safe house, once merely a refuge, became a place where time seemed suspended, every moment stretching under the weight of unspoken truths. Maya woke each morning to the soft sounds of guards changing shifts and the distant hum of the city she could no longer touch. She told herself she needed to stay strong, to remain herself in a world that threatened to consume her identity, yet every step she took seemed tethered to Alessandro's presence. Determined not to be reduced to a silent observer in her own life, Maya began asking questions, not about the violence or the power, but about him. One evening, as they sat across from each other in the dimly lit living room, she asked softly, "Who were you before all of this?" Alessandro's fingers stilled around his coffee cup. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he sighed, the sound heavy with memory. "I didn't choose this life," he admitted. "It was chosen for me." He spoke of a childhood shaped by expectations, of a father whose shadow loomed large, and of a crown of power that felt more like a chain than a privilege. Maya listened, her heart tightening as she realized how little choice either of them had truly been given. As days turned into nights, small moments of normalcy began to surface between them. Shared meals, quiet conversations, fleeting smiles that felt almost dangerous in their simplicity. Maya noticed how Alessandro never sat with his back to a door, how his eyes always found hers first when a room changed. She began to understand his silences, the way responsibility weighed on him, the loneliness hidden beneath his composure. Slowly, without realizing it, her fear softened into empathy, and empathy into something warmer, something that unsettled her far more than danger ever had. One afternoon, Maya insisted on stepping outside, just for a moment of fresh air. Alessandro hesitated, then agreed, staying close as they walked through the enclosed garden. The sun filtered through the leaves, casting patterns of light across the ground, and for a brief second the world felt almost peaceful. "I don't want to disappear," Maya said suddenly. "I want to be more than someone you protect." Alessandro stopped, turning to face her fully. "You are," he said firmly. "You're the reason I'm trying to end this war before it consumes everything." The admission stunned her. She hadn't realized she mattered that much, to him or to the future he was trying to shape. That night, the past came crashing back into the present. A call from Alessandro's uncle, cold, authoritative, and filled with warnings, reminded them both that love was a liability in his world. Maya overheard enough to understand the risk she represented. Guilt pressed heavily on her chest. "I'm making things harder for you," she said quietly later. Alessandro's voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed a storm beneath. "You're making me human," he replied. The words lingered long after the silence returned. Maya lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her heart caught between logic and longing. Loving him was dangerous. Staying was dangerous, but leaving felt impossible. When she finally drifted into sleep, it was with the understanding that the walls she had built around her heart were crumbling, replaced by something fragile and terrifyingly real. By the time dawn broke, Maya knew the truth she could no longer deny. Her safe, normal life hadn't just ended the day she met the Mafia prince, it had transformed into something deeper, something she was choosing, even if it came at a cost. And as she met Alessandro's gaze across the quiet room that morning, she understood that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, whether the world approved or not.
The warning came at dawn, delivered not with gunfire but with silence. Maya woke to the sound of Alessandro's voice, low and urgent, speaking to someone on the phone outside her door. When she stepped into the hallway, she knew instantly that something had changed. His shoulders were rigid, his jaw tight. The calm authority he wore like armor now cracked by something far more dangerous than anger, fear. He ended the call and turned to her, eyes dark with resolve. "We're out of time," he said. The rival family had issued an ultimatum. Maya was the leverage they could no longer ignore. If Alessandro didn't step down, didn't hand over control of key territory, they would keep coming, for him, for her, for anyone caught in the middle. Maya felt the weight of his world crash down around her. She didn't need to hear the details to understand the truth. She was the weakness they could exploit. And for the first time since she had entered this world, Maya knew what she had to do. That night, she packed quietly, not because she wanted to leave, but because she believed she had to. When Alessandro found her standing by the door with a small bag in her hands, something broke in his expression. "What are you doing?" he asked, though he already knew. Maya forced herself to meet his gaze, her heart aching. "I can't be the reason you lose everything," she said. "This isn't my war." Alessandro took a step toward her, his voice tight. "It became your war the moment they targeted you." Tears blurred her vision, but she stood her ground. "I won't let them use you against you," she whispered. The silence between them stretched painfully, filled with everything they hadn't said, everything they were afraid to admit. Finally, Alessandro reached for her hands, holding them gently but firmly. "You don't get to decide alone anymore," he said. "You're not disposable." The word hit her harder than any threat ever could. For a moment, it seemed like he might stop her, that he would refuse to let her go, but love in his world came with impossible choices. Alessandro stepped back, his expression controlled but his eyes full of something dangerously close to heartbreak. "If you leave," he said quietly, "you'll be watched, guarded, hidden." Maya nodded. "I know." What she didn't say was that hiding from him would be the hardest part. The departure was silent, no goodbyes, no promises, just a lingering look as she walked away, every step tearing at her heart. Maya had entered his world by accident, but now she was leaving by choice, believing that sacrifice was the only way to protect the man she had come to love. Alessandro stood alone long after she was gone, the weight of power never feeling heavier. For the first time, he understood the cost of love, not as a weakness, but as a force strong enough to break even a Mafia prince. And as the sun rose over a city on the brink of war, both of them knew one truth. This wasn't the end. It was the moment everything would be decided. The city held its breath the night everything came to a head. Alessandro stood at the center of his world, surrounded by men who waited for his command. But his thoughts were nowhere near the war unfolding around him. They were with Maya, with the empty rooms she had left behind, with the silence that had followed her sacrifice. Power had always been his burden, something inherited and enforced. But now, for the first time, he understood what it truly cost, and he made his choice. The confrontation was swift and decisive. Alessandro refused to surrender territory, refused to bow, and refused to let fear dictate his future. He met his rivals with strategy rather than bloodshed, dismantling their leverage piece by piece until their threats collapsed under their own weight. By dawn, the war was over, not because of violence, but because Alessandro had proven something far more dangerous than ruthlessness: resolve. The message was clear. Maya was untouchable. Miles away, Maya felt the shift before she understood it. The tension that had haunted her every breath finally loosened, replaced by an unfamiliar calm. When Alessandro appeared at the door of the quiet house where she had been hidden, she froze, her heart pounding as if it had known he was coming. He looked tired, but free. "It's over," he said softly. "You're safe." She searched his face, tears filling her eyes. "At what cost?" she asked. Alessandro stepped closer, careful, as though giving her space to decide. "At the cost of pretending I could live without you," he replied. The words shattered the last of her defenses. Maya closed the distance between them, resting her forehead against his chest, finally allowing herself to feel everything she had held back. They didn't speak of the future in grand promises. They didn't need to. Their understanding was quiet, deliberate, and real. Maya returned not as someone who needed protection, but as someone who chose to stand beside him. Alessandro, no longer just the Mafia prince, became a man redefining his world, one where love was not a weakness, but a reason to change. As the sun rose over the city that had once stolen her normal life, Maya realized something profound. Safety had never meant absence of danger. It had meant having someone who would fight for her choice to stay. Her life would never be ordinary again, but it would be honest, chosen, and shared. And as they stood together, hand in hand, facing a world that would never be simple, Maya knew the truth. Her safe, normal life hadn't ended the day she met the Mafia prince. It had finally begun.